with that, I think we're going to get started today. And today we're going to be talking about carbon credits and some costs. And first up to get us started will be Kapil, and I think he might be having a little, we have to get him rights to host. So it'll be just a second and we'll be up and running.
I just added him.
Perfect. So certainly carbon credits and policy has been an important part of driving the rapid look at anaerobic digestion and a key to moving it forward. So we thought reviewing some of what's out there for carbon credits and how they're driving some of this market was a great place to start. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kapil.
All righty. Thanks, Dan. Hope you guys can see my screen there.
We can see your screen, but if you're sharing your presentation mode, we're not looking at your slides in presenter mode rather than there we go. Perfect.
How about now? Okay. All righty. So just wanted to give a quick rundown through what different carbon markets are out there. Gonna start out with California's CARB, which is the Air Resources Board. They do have a couple programs running for methane produced from agricultural anaerobic digestion projects. They do have cap and trade program, but then they also have the low carbon fuel standard LCFS, where the natural gas is cleaned, compressed, and then used for transportation fuels. Both these programs have been in place for a while, but participation is more towards LCFS. Looking through the citations and their data, you cannot be stacking both projects. They're wanting you to be participant in one or the other. But it started out with carbon offsets where methane was just being flared, but now into LCFS where you can actually get the transportation fuel credit for it. Prices wise, I looked through some of the data for where the LCFS market for Californians credits are. We are actually down to around $55 per ton. It actually was pretty high, around 220 at one time, I believe, back in early January 2020, but still pretty good numbers to work with. Oregon also has similar low carbon renewable fuel standards, and their credits are also running around $50 to $55 per ton. They also had higher prices around 150, 160. This chart is showing you the production in those blue bars, and peak has been almost 500,000 credits just in January of 2024. So markets are active and are producing revenues out of it. Average $75 per metric ton. So for natural gas, that turns around, natural gas is around 53 kilograms of CO2 per million BTUs. So for a lagoon to digester covered lagoon project, that translates to around $31 per million BTUs. If we take deep pit to digester, you can see the conversion numbers right there. We are at $16 per million BTUs. So those numbers are pretty good numbers. The other thing is some of the programs may allow stacking, so RINs and LCFS credits can get stacking on one on top of the other. EPA is where the RINs are. So anaerobic digestion projects where we are using agricultural materials to produce methane. These projects get renewable identification numbers assigned to them for every gallon of natural gas produced. And it comes from the renewable fuel standard, provided that the biogas that is produced gets processed and is actually used as a transportation fuel in the transportation sector. RINs that get assigned have 38 alphanumeric value to the actual physical gallon. The ones that are of interest would be the alphabet D, and these are numbers 3, 4, 5, and 6, and we'll talk about it here later because based off of where that renewable source is coming from, what is the renewable fuel category, the D RINs have different values or different prices. So this chart is showing you D3, D4, D5, and D6 RIN prices. D3 RINs are around 320, 325, whereas the D4, 5, 6 are around little under $1. So if you were to do the conversions there, I've shared them in the slide set there. $3 D3 RIN comes out to be around $35 per million BTUs. Just natural gas by itself there, $8 per million BTUs. D3 RINs come from digestion of agricultural manures and cellulosic residues coming from ag sources, whereas food waste are the D5 RINs. There are other carbon offset markets out there where we can get carbon credits. American Carbon Reserve is one of them, Vera is another one, and the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Market is another one. The IC is actually the European carbon market, but they also have pretty good prices. The European carbon price, just looking at it the other day, is around $67 per credit that is offered. So that's doing relatively good for pricing. One other registry that's out there is REGI. This is in the northeastern states. There are currently 11 states that are participating in REGI. And what REGI is focusing on is power plants. They must acquire REGI's CO2 allowances for every short ton of CO2 that they emit. And under this project, these allowances run 3 years, and every 3 years they get reevaluated and figured out. But agricultural methane production projects coming from ag sources qualify. However, they do have the restriction on them that the project must be within those states. REGI is right now going through the entire review of their entire process, and we'll have to just wait and see what new recommendations they come out from there. There is quite a bit of other additional discussion going on of capturing biogenic CO2 that we produce through the anaerobic digestion. Definitely, we are separating methane out of it, but can we also get CO2 concentrated, separated out, and then either stored or get used? And if we go down that path, there are discussions going on for getting carbon credits issued for that as well. One last thing that I wanted to point out for the digested solids that are produced through anaerobic digestion, they have a pathway where there can be some money paid to the landowner who uses those digested solids that are composted and converted into organic matter, so to speak. Organic farming program that's run by USDA has some funds to directly pay landowners if they are using compost to improve the organic matter content of their soils for improved soil quality. The program has to be implemented by the state and must be running for the landowner to be able to apply for those funds. but I've heard payments of around $75 to $100 per acre actually going to the landowner for putting compost down. So key points that I do want to point out for all these registries are uh, every one of these registries requires validation of the credits that are being offered. And then whoever turns around and buys the credits requires valid verification for those. So there are costs that are involved in the entire process. So when you see the prices, uh, do understand that there are costs that will tag on for participation in the program. Another thing is project participation in multiple registries or double tipping is typically not allowed. Certain registries have contracts in which these stipulations are laid out that you'll only be offering the credits in one registry and not be doing it in other ones. And last one is I may have left out maybe one or two other registries, but every one of the ones is following pretty good standards and the prices are good. Uh, Policies, governmental policies do come into play. We may see other registries emerge if the carbon market stays strong, but if we get political pressures, there is possibilities that markets may vanish as well over time, as was the case with the Chicago's carbon exchange. So we do need to be aware of those market fluctuations that show alongside for those. And with that, I'll pass it back to Dan.
Perfect. Thanks, Kapil. So I think, as Kapil mentioned, carbon registries are really important when you look at some of those values of the carbon credit relative to what we're making on sort of that sale of natural gas. It's extremely important that they're there and that we're finding some of those viable markets. Next up to present. So I think you're still screen sharing. If you can stop for me, Kapil. Perfect. So Luke, if you could start screen sharing. Luke is a graduate student here at Iowa State working with me. And one of the things that he has been exploring is what size farms are necessary to make some of these projects cash flow, at least from an initial look. So he's going to look through and talk us about some of the potential design options and challenges and how to make some of these projects scale and hopefully find a cost-effective means of implementation. So I think that's something that there was at least a fair amount of interest from in the survey, and I know it's a curiosity that I definitely have. So with that, Luke, I think if you can talk for us, we'll make sure we hear you.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Beautiful. We hear you perfect. So whenever you're ready, take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Luke Soko. I'm a PhD student, and I work with Dr. Dan Anderson. And we're going to run through some projections for anaerobic digestion renewable natural gas projects. So I believe you all know about anaerobic digestion, but anaerobic digestion is the process of microbes breaking down organic matter in the absence of oxygen. And the reason there's not oxygen in these giant manure piles is really a function of the biological oxygen demand of the manure microbes and oxygen diffusivity. Essentially, the oxygen is not diffusing far through the manure because the microbes at the top layer are using it all, and that leaves all the rest of the manure to digest anaerobically, which means it uses things like carbon dioxide, sulfate, and nitrate as an electron acceptor. And the whole point of this is a different form of cellular respiration, and it generates biogas and digestate. And biogas is a mixture of gases, and what I have here isn't always the perfect mixture of biogas that exists. But biogas from manure is roughly about 60% methane, 34% carbon dioxide, 3% water, 2% nitrogen, 1% oxygen, roughly 2,000 parts per million of hydrogen sulfide. And that varies a lot. It does vary, but the important part is getting roughly that 60% methane fraction. And renewable natural gas is roughly about 96% methane. So we want that methane if we're making renewable natural gas. And here's kind of a schematic that clearly shows what I'm talking about. So we have organic waste, manure and wastewater, biosolids, food waste, other organics, and we're generating that biogas and that digestate Typically, we can use that digestate as an organic fertilizer, and that biogas, in this project at least, we're going to be talking about making renewable natural gas, and specifically renewable natural gas because that is a transportation fuel, and we can collect those low carbon fuel standard credits, and we can collect those renewable identification number credits, those RINs and LCFS, by making that transportation fuel. And that's going to be very lucrative for our revenue. And anaerobic digestion, the figure on the right shows that it's a 4-step process using a wide variety of microbes. And we don't have to talk about that much, but there's hydrolysis, acidogenesis, acetogenesis, and methanogenesis. So to begin the model, we have 2 types of animals that we're going to talk about today, dairy and swine. We're going to talk about 3 different manure storage types: the outdoor tank, the lagoon, and the deep pit. And then we're going to talk about emptying frequencies, 1 time per year or 2 times per year. And that makes a big difference how often you're emptying your manure storage. If you're at a typical swine facility, you'll likely empty your manure storage about once a year. If you're at a dairy facility, now the manure generated from dairy is a lot. It's a lot of manure from dairy. And so you're typically emptying 2 times per year or more. So we'll look at both of those models. And we're going to talk about farm sizes ranging from 100 to 5,000 cows, and swine farms ranging from 1,200 to 35,000 swine. We're going to talk about 3 different types of anaerobic digesters, the covered manure storage. Now, if you look at AgStar's data and trends, the lagoon digester, that covered lagoon digester, is the most common digester in the United States. And that is what we're modeling there, is a covered manure storage. It could be a covered lagoon. It could be a manure storage where you're covering it. And that's not heated. It's not mixed. It's simply harnessing that biogas from that manure storage. And that's an unheated system. And then we'll look at heated systems, digesters, heated, sometimes mixed. And then we'll look at what if you have a digester and a covered manure storage. And this is kind of what, our manure vessels look like. We have the outdoor tank, we have the lagoon, and we have the deep pit. Now notice on the deep pit collects manure below the slotted floors, or the slats. And so you can't simply cover a deep pit, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you can cover a lagoon. You can cover an outdoor tank. Just that covering a deep pit, how's the manure going to get to the pit if we're covering the pit? We're going to have to build a new storage. So conventional farms, we have dairy farms. They oftentimes use an uncovered manure storage. Sometimes it's a tank, sometimes it's below ground, not below the barn, but somewhere else in a different section. And then we have swine farms, the deep pits, that's below the barn. And then we have the swine farm with the lagoon. And in all of those situations, the biogas is simply being released in the atmosphere, releasing methane and carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And so the first system we're going to talk about, the most common anaerobic digester system, is that covered manure storage. And that's our modeled system at the bottom. So we have the barn, we have the covered manure storage, and we have the biogas upgrader. So that's going to convert that biogas to a nice pure stream of methane. It's not going to be completely pure, but it'll be pure enough. We can get around 97%, 98% methane, and we can put it into the natural gas grid. We can put it into the grid, and we can collect our carbon credits. So our sources of revenue are going to come from natural gas sales, notably very low compared to the carbon credits that we receive, the RIN credits and the LCFS credits. And these values, these percentage of the revenue, those are based on the last 6 years of averages. But currently, and I'll talk about this soon, the LCFS market is a bit down and the RIN market is a bit up. So those sources of revenue, that's based on the last 6 years between 2018 and 2024. Our sources of cost are going to be the deep pit barn amount. If you have a deep pit barn, you need to build additional manure storage. You need to build something you can cover. So we'll cover that. The manure storage cover, the biogas upgrader, that's going to be our largest cost. That's a large piece of machinery. The natural gas injection site, depending on your situation, could be a very high cost, typically a high cost, and carbon credit brokerage fees. So, and there's another schematic to kind of look at it with, nice pictures. We have cows and we have pigs, and they are excreting manure, and that manure is going into a storage. And we need that storage to be a covered storage so that we can harness that biogas from the manure storage. And we're looking at how many cows does it take to profit? How many pigs does it take to profit? And when we talk about profit in this situation, we're really just talking about economic feasibility. Who can even play in the game? And then once we have that covered storage, we need that big piece of equipment, that big machinery, that biogas upgrader to purify that stream of biogas to renewable natural gas, and then inject that natural gas into the grid. And we're talking about a 5-year project life, 8% interest. 5-year project life, 8% interest. That's important. So when we talk about what's a break even, we're talking about breaking even in 5 years. And depending on your situation, maybe you can afford more years, maybe you can't. Important stuff. Cost, basic review, the impermeable cover that we need to cover the storage, that's going to range, if you're annualizing that value over 5 years, that's going to range between about $13,000 per year to about $167,000 per year. And that includes maintenance costs to repair tears in the cover. The biogas upgrader is a project. We have project estimate costs from 6 separate companies, all European, 6 separate companies, and literature values. And we'll talk about that in a second. That's the next slide, because that is a big cost, and it's important to know that one. And then we have the natural gas injection site. Now we have $1 million. That's a rough average from the Department of Energy. That's the CapEx, and that can vary tremendously. You can go up to 2 million. You can go down to 500,000. That really depends on your location, your relationship with your utility company, because the utility company, they have to be in on it. You can't just inject into the grid. And the carbon credit brokerage fees you need, if you are brokering carbon credits, you need to give those carbon credits essentially to an entity that collects carbon credits and brokers them out at a larger volume for more efficiently. So you're going to take about a 20 to 10% fee when you are brokering your carbon credits. And the manure storage modifications, if you have a deep pit barn, you might have to pay about $32 per pig per year. That's annualized over 5 years to build a new manure storage. Yeah. Biogas upgrader. The important part of this slide is that you understand if you're buying a biogas upgrader, you should be looking to pay between $1 and $4 million. Now, these are from 6 separate companies and 19 price estimates. Now, we've been told that American prices could be roughly 30% more than European prices, but also keep in mind that currently there's the investment tax credit. That's part of the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. And you can get up to 30%. Well, you could get up to more, but you could get, if you're following the wage requirements, you can get 30% off your capital investment if you begin that project right now before 2025. We're seeing if that legislature expands past 2025, but you could get essentially 30% off your biogas upgrader if you start that project right now. But that legislation might get expanded. But the important part of this slide is that you should be looking to spend between $1 and $4 million for your biogas upgrader. Carbon credit review. So Kapil did an excellent job talking about our carbon credits. And this nice figure here, the dark gray, are the clean fuel standards enacted right now. So you can trade with California, you can trade with Oregon, you can trade with Washington, you can trade with New Mexico. The other states, they have bills that are essentially pending. They have 3 separate sections of a pending bill. The RIN credit I'm going to talk about today is the D3 RIN, as Kapil had mentioned. That's the most profitable RIN right now. It's also the RIN that's correlated with the greatest reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And that average, and that's per gallon of ethanol, or 77,000 BTU, if you're translating through energy. That average from 2018 to 2024, that's $2.21 per gallon. The current price for that RIN is $3.20, so it's gone up a bit. Now, the low carbon fuel standard, and these are based on California's prices. The average throughout the last 6 years from 2018 to 2024, that's $155 per megagram or metric ton, whichever unit you prefer, of carbon dioxide equivalents. And that's correlated. So carbon dioxide equivalents, what does that mean? That's correlated to your CI score. So when you have these systems, you're going to have a carbon intensity score that's going to be assigned to your anaerobic digester. And we'll talk about that on the next slide too, or on one of these slides. And that carbon intensity score is correlated with how much good are you doing for the environment? How many emissions are you mitigating per megajoule of fuel that you are producing? And then that unit of your CI score is multiplied out through the carbon credit price of however many dollars per megagram of carbon dioxide equivalents, and that is how you receive your value. And that current price is down at $65 per megagram of carbon dioxide equivalents, down quite a bit, but could go up. So, and here is this looking at it. Now we can look at it comparing a 6-year average to the November 2024 price. And the reason I have this slide, and this is all normalized per dollar of cubic meter of methane. And I normalize these values to show you a couple things. One if you're talking about all the revenue sources combined, RIN, LCFS, and natural gas, we're down about 65 cents, 67 cents right now this month compared to the 6-year average. Although the RIN and the LCFS market share, or not market share, but percent of our sum has flip-flopped. Our RIN is now more profitable than our LCFS. 63% of our sum, as the 6-year average, it was 34%. Essentially, I'm showing you that, and we've charted these two together. They are negatively correlated. We can't speculate as to why, but the RIN and LCFS market are slightly negatively correlated. So when one goes up, sometimes one goes down, but we can't speculate on that. So, and here's kind of the conclusion. So we have our dairy and we have our x-axis dairy in units of, head, and then we have swine in units of head from 0 to 35,000. And it's important to look at the 5-year project life. Companies want to be paid back fast. People want their money now. And also, if we're looking at dairy, we're probably going to be emptying that manure storage twice a year. So let's look at those orange diamonds there, those orange diamonds in the dairy. MS emptied 2 times per year, 5-year project life. Well, there we're talking about a break even where your profit, your dollar per year per head. So this is annualized profit per head. Okay, you're looking at a break even around 1,200 head. And that's 1,200 head. And speaking of the costs, when I was talking about costs, we're not paying any engineers. We're not paying an overhead for anybody. So keep that in mind that when we're talking about profit, we're talking about economic feasibility. Can you even play in the ball game? And we're saying not really. If you don't have 1,200 cows and you want to be paid back in 5 years, you can't really play quite yet, not under the current conditions. And if we're talking about pigs, if you have a lagoon system, which are pretty uncommon in Iowa, typically you talk about deep pit. If you have a lagoon system and you're paid back in 5 years, now you're looking back to be paid back in about around 8,600 head of swine for 5 years for lagoon. And then for deep pit, you really never break even for a 5-year project. And that is because you got to build that new manure storage. You can't simply cover it. And this, once again, is unheated digester, specifically covering those storages. And this is displayed a lot more efficiently here. So we have dairy, the manure storage is emptied 2 times per year. Now, the interesting part of this is if the break even, you see there is roughly 1,200 head. Now, we've gone through the Iowa DNR and looked at herd size on farms, and roughly 78% of the Iowa dairy herd lies on farms with 1,179 cows or more, which means that we're talking about economically feasible projects on farms that could encompass about 78% of the Iowa dairy herd. Now, with swine, we're not there. With lagoon systems, we're specifically not there because there's not a lot of lagoons in Iowa. So even at that 8,600 mark, we're at about 2% of the Iowa swine herd. And with deep pit, we're not falling where we need to be. And we need some innovation there. Now let's talk about heated digesters. So those are all covered manure storages. What if we heat the digester? And what if we have a digester with a covered manure storage? And we can see those kind of schematics below. So we have the covered manure storage. Now I have a digester and an uncovered manure storage and a digester and a covered manure storage. And kind of an overview of digesters, you have 3 types. You have the unheated, that covered storage. You have the heated, a complete mixed digester. And then you have the heated, the plug flow. And when we talk about digesters, sometimes we talk about it in terms of percent of anaerobic digestion efficiency. So in the digester world, the BMP, the biochemical methane potential, biochemical methane potential is really your 100% anaerobic digestion efficiency. And when we look at digesters, we measure it as what percent of the BMP are we achieving. If you're an unheated digester using Iowa temperatures, using the Tier 1 Simplified CI calculator published by the California Air Resources Board, we have found that you will have about 67% of your BMP achieved if the manure storage is emptied once a year. 42% of your BMP is achieved if your manure storage is emptied twice a year. That's quite a difference, but that's also a difference of 6 months of retention. And the heated digesters, and we got this data, heated digester data from AgStar. You have about 75% of the BMP is achieved with the heated digester. And this graph below here, that's courtesy of Washington State's Anaerobic Digestion Enterprise Calculator. And I should have cited that there. Washington State, they have a calculator for digesters. You're gonna, if you buy a digester, you're gonna also look to spend between $1 and $4 million. That's another very large expense. If you're buying a heated digester, that is a large expense. Okay, and here's kind of an overview, and this is a tough table to pick things out immediately, but what I want to tell you is that you have a manure storage emptying events. You have once a year and you have twice a year. And then for once a year, you have the covered storage, the digester, and the digester and covered storage. And then you have twice a year, covered storage, digester, and covered storage. And you can see how the CI score changes. Now, the CI score, that carbon intensity score, is best in the covered storage. And the reason that is because with the digester, you have to invest some of the gas that you're making to heat your system. In the covered storage, you're not heating the system. You have a lesser energy input. You're going to have a better carbon intensity or more grams of carbon dioxide equivalents per megajoule achieved. And yeah, so and the first key point is if you're emptying your manure storage less, you're going to have greater gas production. You have greater gas production and every time you're emptying once compared to twice. But depending on your storage size, that may not be feasible. And the second point is the digester is not necessarily more profitable than the covered storage. It's really a function of the outdoor temperature, your digestion efficiency, your relation to CI score. There are a lot of companies that they work in southern states, and they're very effective by just having a covered storage. With a covered storage, you could have a retention of 6 months to a year. And if in the right conditions with the right heat, that could be effective at generating a lot of methane and breaking down a lot of those volatile solids to where you don't even need a digester. So we see if you're emptying once a year, the covered storage is actually more profitable than the digester. And these are all based on a 400 head farm. But if you have a digester, in every scenario there's a digester with a covered storage will not only achieve a better CI score, but will bring in more revenue. You will be able to pay off the price of the cover with the additional gas production of covering the storage along with the digester. And that is best illustrated here. So here we can see dairy, and we're ranging from 0 to 10,000 head. And essentially, the covered storage is the most profitable until about 5,000 head. And notice also the profit is not, it's not a tremendous range. And keep in mind with the digester, you had to buy the digester. And that's between $1 and $4 million. It's a large expense. So even if you're making more gas, you got to make a lot of gas to cover that expense. So after 5,000 head, the digester and covered storage is a very profitable solution. It's the most profitable solution. And that is something that we are thinking we will see more in the future, is the combo of digesters with covered storage on large farms. And again, these are based on Iowa outdoor temperatures. This profit varies depending on the temperature that's outside. And in the future, to conclude this, in the future, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to inject your renewable natural gas at your farm wherever you live. Where you have to analyze hub and spoke models. So either you have a biogas upgrader on your farm, or you have a biogas upgrader at a centralized location where there's also an injection site. So you're either transporting RNG or you're transporting biogas, and you're transporting them either by trucks or by pipelines. And that's kind of best illustrated by this figure. In reality, we're going to have to add an additional cost for moving the gas. You could move the manure, but you could move the gas too. And typically right now that's done by moving renewable natural gas. But we've been investigating, you could move biogas by pipeline. You could move biogas by truck. That's not done right now. It's not impossible. You could move RNG by pipeline or RNG by truck. And those 4 different systems kind of look there. The bottom system, if you have a community upgrader and you're moving biogas with a truck, you need to dehydrate it. You need to scrub it of hydrogen sulfide. You need to compress it into the truck. There are a lot of reasons why biogas isn't moved to the truck right now, but these are things to investigate. We need to move gas probably to a centralized location. And in conclusion, you need roughly 1,200 dairy cows to break even in 5 years, emptying your manure storage twice a year. That's just to get your head in the game. To begin, and you need about 8,600 swine to break even in 5 years. That's the lagoon manure storage. If you're in a deep pit, we're in trouble. We need innovation for the deep pit swine farms to break even under the current assumptions. 75% of the Iowa dairy herd exists on farms right now where AD could be economically feasible. The covered storage is most profitable until roughly 5,000 dairy head, and then the next most profitable option is the digester and covered storage. And the digester and covered storage option was always more profitable than the digester alone. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed, and back to you, Dan.
All right, thanks, Luke. We did have a question for you. It is estimated, the question was really about installation cost and payback period. You said you didn't include in engineering costs, but does your cost, is it just to purchase the equipment, or is it to install the equipment? And my understanding is based on how you got that data from literature reviews, it would be installed price of the equipment, or installed price of the cover, or installed price of the digester.
Correct. Yes, that's an installed cost. And they vary. But if you have that upgrader, and so the upgrader maybe between 1 and 4 million, and if you have the digester maybe between 1 and 4 million again, I mean that's a capital cost of maybe between 2 and 8 million if you include that digester. That's a huge range, but it also depends on your farm size.
Perfect. So a couple of reminders for everyone. If you would take a moment to please complete our quiz. As I mentioned, we do use that information to understand who's here, and we'll share that with everyone so you know who's attending and who's interested in digesters, hopefully within the state, but maybe beyond state boundaries. If you have any questions for either Luke or Kapil, feel free to get them typed in the chat and we can get those addressed as well. All right. We have one, is the 8,600 head of swine based on a market hog? And there the answer is yes, they're all on. Did you do wean to finish or grow to finish pigs?
Wean to finish.
So they're wean to finish farms. That's a place where we need to do a little bit more work to understand sort of sow farms sizing as well, and that will change it up, but it was all based on wean to finish. If you would prefer to ask your question via voice, you can feel free to unmute yourself as well to ask the question. Okay, hearing none, can I get you to share your screen, Luke? All right, so one of the things we would ask you to do is fill out our voluntary demographic survey. This webinar series is supported by a USDA NRCS project. So filling out that survey is useful and important for us. Melissa has provided a link in case you don't want to scan your QR code. Maya asked, are there any ways to optimize gas production? And Luke, do you want to take the first shot at that, and I'll help you out if you need some help?
Yeah. Heat is as you get closer to 37 degrees Celsius, or roughly the temperature of the cow's stomach, the degradation of volatile solids and methane production will increase exponentially. And the calculator for carb uses the Van't Hoff Arrhenius function to estimate methane production. But mostly heat, and there's various studies on mixing, although it depends on mixing. I would say heat's number one.
Yeah, certainly
And
heat's
retention.
important. Heat's important, retention time is important, and then thinking about other substrates you can make. For example, the solids content of manure, essentially how much volatile solids you can get in that digester is critical, right? So if it ends up being 3% solids, we have a lot of water in there. You can think about adding other things to the mix that might thicken that up to try and get more gas production per unit volume. And anytime you're taking other substrates, we want to think about what else is coming along for the ride. For instance, if you take glycerol, there's only so much glycerol that you can add before you might cause issues with souring your digester. Or if you take some industrial byproduct, there's other chemicals that can come along that can cause some problems. If we think about chemicals added in the ag world, sometimes we'll see that a barn gets cleaned with some different detergents, and some of those detergents can have antimicrobial properties that can cause digestion speed to lag. But there are ways to play with the recipe or mix that can influence sort of the digestibility of all the stuff that's in there. One of the terms that you'll see people sort of work with and adjust is that carbon to nitrogen ratio. Most manures tend to be relatively rich in nitrogen, more so than they need to be for optimum digestion. So that is a parameter that you can adjust and sort of play with. And we'll try and talk about that a little bit more with biomass next time. So hopefully you've seen the link to the demographic survey. This is supported by a USDA Natural Resources project. The federal award number is NR233A75004G072. And any findings that we talked about here today are related to our own personal opinions, not necessarily the USDA, although they are science-based. As a reminder, next time we're going to talk about biomass. I think Luke pointed out greatly for us that many of these projects, especially on the swine manure side, may have trouble finding economies of scale, which is why we might have to look at some of those other materials, biomasses, or other things that make it a little harder to optimize our mix, but certainly will be important on trying to get this to work on more farms. We'll talk a little bit about how to incorporate biomass in some of our crop rotations, looking at what it might take for cover crops, and then talk through some of those changes to digesters or digestion properties.
Yeah, and as Dan had mentioned, when you can increase the carbon nitrogen ratio by introducing carbonaceous feedstocks. I'm sure that's what we're going to be talking about next time. And that could be corn stover, perennial ground cover. That's a really good way of bumping up the C to N ratio. The problem is then if you're introducing those biomass feedstocks, you might need a mix. You probably need that complete heated and mixed digester. And also you're going to have issues with, not necessarily issues, but you may need to add water, or you can't add too much before water becomes a critical role, and you might have too many solids. It might not be moving well through the pumps.
Absolutely. That'll be one of the challenges we try to address. And as we look forward to doing this in 2025 with continuing webinars, one of the places that we are interested in is having more case studies. So if you have a digester or would be interested in presenting at a future webinar, you can either scan that QR code or go use this link to go to the site and submit to us that you would like to do a webinar. We'll be in touch with some of the logistics behind doing that, but we look forward to helping you connect, hopefully with farmers in Iowa, and sharing sort of the projects that you've done and your vision going forward, because as we saw, one of the limitations maybe for anaerobic digestion was knowledge, and sometimes that's knowing who to talk to or what options are out there. So if we can help facilitate that, we'd be glad to do that. So with that, I wanted to thank both Kapil and Luke for talking us through parts of the carbon credit or economics of digester market today. Thank you all for your attendance. And if you do have any other questions, please feel free to ask them now. And if you still have a moment, if you could fill out that poll for us, we'd greatly appreciate it, and we'll share the results next time. So thank you.